Hello, everyone, and welcome to TheWrap's newest Strike Roundtable. Today, we are going to be talking about the problem with MiniRooms. I am joined today by an incredible group of writers who know all about this topic. We've got Tolli, who works on Roswell, New Mexico, Dylan Guerra, who works on the other two, Elaine Loh, works on Gossip Girl and Dynasty, Nasser Samara with Love, Victor, and iCarly, and then, of course, we have Shelley Meals with Shadow and Bone. Listeners, just to set the stage for you on what mini-rooms are, a mini-room is a practice in which a television creator assembles a writer's room to create scripts for an entire season, often before the show has even been greenlit. But there's a lot of nuance to this, and these people know significantly more about it than I do because they live in this experience. So if anyone, please correct me if that baseline is wrong. Feel free to jump in and be like, Andi, you are terrible at this. This is what it actually is. Great. All right, so let's get into it. First and foremost, guys, we are coming off Labor Day weekend. It's a long weekend, but it feels like it maybe had some additional weight this year considering everything that is going on with both the writers and SAG being on strike. Elaine, I want to ask you about this. I mean, what was this weekend like for you? How did that feel? Like, what was kind of the vibe for you?
You know, honestly, I think it feels inspirational to be a part of hot labor summer, as they call it, but truly the issues that we're fighting for, a lot of other types of workers are fighting for. And so it's inspirational to be part of a movement, to have this holiday that was started, I heard on the radio, I think in the 1890s or something like that, labor is a big part of what makes our country run. So I find it heartening to know that I'm a part of that.
Good. And I mean, over 100 days in at this point, I imagine it's nice to kind of have that inspiration and have that little bit of morale boost. I want to get into the topic at hand, MiniRooms, of course. Shelley, I want to come to you because you've been a guild member for a long time at this point. MiniRooms, in the grand scheme of things, are a newer thing, right? They only came about within the last decade or so. Being in the business as long as you have been, what kind of impact have you seen just in this decade of MiniRooms kind of coming about?
Wow. Well, historically, there was no separation of writing and production for episodic TV, right? So the studios have made a very conscious decision now, put writers in a position where they have to do more work in less time for less money while the companies line their own pockets. So our goal is really to bring sustainability and fair compensation back to TV writing. And I think, it's important to make clear that we're not trying to add writers to the room. What we're trying to do is prevent attrition. We're trying to maintain the levels we've had historically, the levels that we need to do the job so that we're not working around the clock to deliver material. And all we're asking for is the time and the personnel to do the job that's required. And I think, the economic anxiety is a very real thing. The companies have pulled the rug out from underneath us. We need, to make money to buy our health insurance, to take care of our children, to afford to live in the cities that we have to live in to do this job. And, writer compensation over the past 5 years is down, I believe it's 24%. Meanwhile, the studios have gone from $5 billion annual production budget to $19 billion. So the studios are taking money for themselves, not investing in their workers. And it's just honestly a middle-class issue. It's not very different from like auto workers in Detroit. We're asking to be treated fairly and they're calling us unreasonable. So yeah, I just don't think we should have to fight to make a middle-class living when the product that we're creating is making them billions.
Right. Well, and Shelley, I also want to ask you, how quickly did MiniRooms kind of become a thing and become maybe bigger than anyone realized they might be?
I think the streamers came into the industry with a very different mindset, right? Where these aren't studios. There's no like Walt and Roy. These are like tech bros, and they just came in with how can we do more for less? And so they first came in with this concept that was like, oh, well, we'll do a mini room to see if it's a proven concept or not, to see if the idea, has enough there to make a show. But it's no longer that at all. I mean, I was in a mini room for the second season of a streaming show that at the time was the biggest hit on that streaming service. It had a movie star as the lead. There was no doubt that there was going to be a second season, but they put together a mini room so that they could pay everybody across the board Writers Guild minimum. So I'm there with 20 plus years experience getting paid staff writer minimum. That's not a fair deal.
Right. Well, Danny, I'll come to you next because I want to kind of dig in a little bit deeper on something that Shelley's alluding to. the workload in a mini room, right? What is the workload actually like in there? Are you doing any less than you would be doing during a normal season of episodic television?
Yeah, my experiences are quite similar to Shelley's. I came up in the business almost 10 years ago through the broadcast model, through the minimum 20 weeks when you're in a writer's room, working with a full fleshed out staff, breaking story, preparing episodes, and then shooting them simultaneously and getting that production experience. In the 2 mini rooms that I've been in so far, it's truncated time, less than 10 weeks, myself and one other writer, if we're lucky, plus the showrunner. And we have to break all of the episodes. We have to turn in all of the outlines. We, as Shelley mentioned, have to prove that the show can be a success, even when we haven't even started rolling cameras. And what I find very frustrating as a creative is that a show lives and breathes on its feet. It's a collaborative process with the directors, with the actors, with the crew. And, one of my favorite things to do in producing when I go down to set is figure out what characters have the most chemistries, what characters haven't we paired, and you don't get that experience in a mini room. And to me, I think we're doing a real disservice to the future generation of writers and of showrunners to not get that necessary production experience because of these mini rooms that the studios have created.
I love that point that you made about going to the set and seeing which characters have chemistry. I would not have thought of that, but that is absolutely true. There are multiple cases in shows that I've watched where character comes in written for maybe like a 3-episode arc, and suddenly they're sticking around for like 5 seasons because they are beloved. And I imagine you, like you said, you can't really get that. You can't really see what's resonating even with just like the cast and crew. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And also, our creative partners, the studios, the legacy studios, if you will, not these tech bro streamers who have come in and sort of destroyed our business. They were willing to take a risk on shows, and especially stories from marginalized communities, from historically excluded writers. They were willing to let a show find its legs in the first couple of episodes. These streamers are so obsessed with it's got to be a hit right out the gate that they're suppressing historically excluded narratives, voices, showrunners, writers, and they're just trying to search for that $1 million that Wall Street will invest in them, as opposed to making art and making a profit off of incredible stories that we create.
My writer's career probably would have started a year and a half earlier without MiniRooms, because every job that I was interviewing for were MiniRooms. And because I was a lower level staff writer at the time, the excuse was we don't have the budget for you to be hired. So that's the thing. If you only get 3 or 4 slots, of course you're going to hire someone who has more experience and then pay them less. And then those 4 writers, if anything, are doing, the work of normally what you'd have 10 to 12 people.
How much of what's crafted in a mini room is actually used in the final product? Is it like you're doing a whole bunch of work that ends up not getting used, or are people doing this work that is getting used and then they aren't being paid for? Like, how much of what is written actually ends up getting used in your experience?
I think, of course, it's going to vary, right, depending on the show. But broadly speaking, given the way that the mini rooms are separate from production, I think that a great deal of what's written in the mini room does not make the final product, because so many things are changed based on production issues, scheduling issues, casting, studio notes, right up to changes on set. And historically, those were changes that the writer of the episode would be around to see, to understand, to have an opportunity to participate in. It's a big part of learning how to write for episodic television, and newer writers have really been robbed of that experience. And on the showrunner side, it's an enormous amount of work on top of their already full schedule, because now they've got to do everything. So, it's not good for anyone. It's not good for the newer writers. It's not good for the upper levels. I know so many showrunners who are really struggling with burnout because there's just so much on their shoulders and they have no support. They would love to have other writers. The best shows are the ones that have writers as long as possible. It's just so clear.
I honestly don't understand. It just is a bad business model. It doesn't make any sense creatively. Because I've been fortunate enough to work on shows where I had showrunners that were giving me the opportunity to go to set to produce the episodes that I wrote on 20-week jobs that had, a team of 8 to 12 writers for 10 episodes. I'm in a position in my career where I'm set up for success when I do have my own show. You're diminishing the quality of the show you're already spending tons of money on. And then you're creating an environment where younger writers especially are not going to be good showrunners. They're not. I mean, it does not make any sense why you're just long-term hurting the quality of the show and the quality of your streamer if this is the way that you want to set up every show that you have.
The thing that you kind of hear a lot, that you'll read a lot about MiniRooms, is that they're really unpredictable, right? Like you go in and you don't know how long you're going to be working. It could be a couple weeks, and then it could be like a couple months. You just really have no idea what it's going to be in a lot of cases. What kind of challenges does that present? I imagine first and foremost, I mean, again, I don't want to assume here, but like in terms of finding other jobs, maybe what kind of challenges are you looking at just with the unpredictability of a MiniRoom?
I come from theater world, and then I sort of did screenwriting, and then I kind of moved through to TV through that, and I did my first room at the end of 2021. And that room existed in like what is sort of, I think, like a gray room for MiniRooms. It was 7 writers, including the 2 showrunners. We met for 15 weeks, and then none of us went to set, except for the showrunners. So it was kind of topsy-turvy, and we were writing a comedy. Now, I was like, our showrunners made the decision that because we had 15 weeks, as opposed for us to race to the end, we were going to get as far as we possibly could. And they asked for an extension, and they did not receive the extension. I think they received the extension for 1 senior level writer for 1 week, or it might have been 2 weeks or something like that. So we as a team made it to episode 8 before of 10 episodes before our room ended. Luckily, we I have jokes that I pitched and stuff that made it into episode 9 and 10, and I knew it was going to happen, but we as a room didn't get to be there for the end of like, oh my God, we did it. Which for me, coming from like playwriting and screenwriting, which are, and this is for a different roundtable, are like, I think, an inherently lonely art form. TV writing was the first collaborative experience I had, and so it cut from me as a younger writer this idea of being able to celebrate the work at the end of it, which did a weird, fun little mental trick for me. And I went to set of my own accord like 5 or 6 times to see what was up on the episodes that I particularly had a big hand in, but that was completely not paid. And from then on, I write very like queer genre forward work. I had been up for 2 shows that were both like struck an interesting like horror comedy place. And I had these 2 showrunner meetings with showrunners who were like, we want to hire you. We're waiting for the budget to be approved. And then they didn't get approved for a normal sized writer's room. They got approved for a mini room. And because I did not have any on-set experience or enough writer's room experience, I got cut. But also it wasn't necessarily like me, Dylan, got cut. The entire title got cut, which I think is like an important distinguish to make for people that aren't super familiar with how writers' rooms work, is specifically with these mini rooms, we're losing the titles of staff writer and story editor in particular. I mean, I think we're losing a lot of these positions, but those 2 in particular. And then I've been so many people that I've talked to about the strike have a hard time understanding some of the like creative, more personal feelings. And so I've begun to talk in numbers. So I would love to just say a couple of numbers out loud, which are, according to the 2022 Diversity and Inclusion Report from the WGA, 54% of writers in the guild identify as POC. 34.6% of all staff writers identify as POC, but only 17.4% of showrunners identify as POC. This is like a mathematical, just very obvious, like, look at who this is affecting. Hollywood is an extremely gate-kept industry, yeah? So because the gates have opened a little, just like a little bit more, that more, I'm a queer Latina person, that more like queer Latina people like me are getting their first opportunity. But the second that we get our first opportunity, the gates then promptly slammed in our faces. And it becomes impossible to move up this ladder. So like, yes, there's an experience thing, and like, yes, I had an incredible time writing on a show, and now I'm just sort of like looking for the opportunity to do it again. And it's affected me and the shows that I'm pitching out, because no one's going to take a risk on my weird autobiographical like thing about a chase for a man that went missing in my life when I have no track record to show from it, other than that I'm like a fun person for 15 weeks in a writer's room. Like it's this weird catch-22. I don't even think it's called a catch-22. I think it's just called a bad fucking cycle. But yeah.
Something I wanted to piggyback off of what Dylan just said is when writers sell a show to a company, to a studio, they're not in the pitch saying, and I want to open up a mini room so that I can develop 8 episodes for a season. They're coming in with their vision and they're telling the studio, their business partner, this is what I need from you to create a success. And the studio in turn is saying, great, we're going to put a mandated mini room less than 10 weeks. You get half of the budget, half of the writers that you need to actually make a hit, because we do not want to invest in your project. So right out the gate, that is what we're facing. And that is why we, the writers and the Writers Guild of America, is on strike to set these minimums in our contracts so that we can say, this is what we need to successfully do our jobs and to make sure that every single member of our guild is continuing to work.
We've been talking a lot about newer projects. Elaine, I want to come to you because you worked on, Gossip Girl and Dynasty, both obviously newer projects, but like with a whole, they're huge titles. They got a whole lot of history behind them. There's a lot of lore there. And I mean, Shelley, the same thing with Shadow and Bone. Like there's books there and whatnot. So to what Shelley was saying earlier about, that showrunners would love to have this team of writers behind them. Elaine, I'm curious for your perspective, working on titles specifically like Gossip Girl, like Dynasty, that have this built-in fan base, this huge history behind them. I mean, how much would having a full team there, how much does mini rooms kind of hurt the story that you are then able to tell?
Well, what's interesting is that a mini room doesn't have to mean a small number of people. It's a small amount of time as well, So Gossip Girl was officially a mini room. Dynasty is a broadcast show, even though it then airs on Netflix, but under the broadcast model. So with Gossip Girl, we had a fairly large room, I think 10 to 12 writers. But we had, 20 weeks to break a full season of, this was season 1 of the Gossip Girl reboot. So, it is a brand new show at that point. And so it was certainly a lot of work, even though there were a lot of people involved. The thing that I noticed is really some stuff that's been touched on already of, we were writing scripts without the time to see anyone else's script, right? Because you only have a certain truncated amount of time. So it's like, you go do that, you go do that, you go do that, you go do that. You don't get to build upon what's come earlier in the season. Similarly, I finished my script, turned it in, and the room was over. So I didn't get to, and that I was a staff writer. So that was my first official TV gig. I didn't get to see what the rewrite process was. Why did things change? Why do some things change for production reasons and some things change for creative reasons? At that point, I didn't know. And certainly I wasn't able to go to set. And in fact, I was told that we would likely not be allowed to go to set. Now, things changed because of the pandemic, and then everyone wasn't allowed to go to set. But I had offered to fly myself to New York because I wanted to be there for my episode. And I think the higher ups, that B said that might be a liability, or I'm not allowed on set, or that type of thing. I don't know what would have happened because of the pandemic. But so I definitely I didn't get that experience and would not have gotten that experience in how to make a TV show, So all of those things that we've touched on certainly happened even in a large mini room, right? With a large number of writers, but you still experience that truncated timeline without the ladder for growth for new writers. And as we've talked about inclusion and diversity, that does affect a larger proportion of, historically underrepresented groups, because we are, for the most part, those people moving up the ladder, So if you can't move up the ladder, then how can you ever be at the top? I have some friends who they have gone title to title, bumping up each mini room that they jump to. They are now supervising producers who don't have on-set experience. So now they can't get jobs at the level that they've reached because no one wants to hire a supervising producer who doesn't know how to produce a show. And that is the the system working against people of all types, but particularly affecting those in underrepresented groups who are trying to get up there.
Wow. And that brings me back to Nasser, something that you were saying, that like as a newer writer, you didn't have the experience to get what you needed. How hard is it then to get into a mini room? Like how can a new writer expect to climb up that ladder? Like, what is the process now? How can a new writer hope to work their way to a showrunner to be eventually what they want to be?
I don't know. I mean, that's the problem with them, is I truly don't know how this model can sustain itself. It makes very little sense in terms of training. I mean, what Elaine just said is it fully addresses the problem. If we are having supervising producers who have no on-set experience, when, I mean, by the time I was on the third season of iCarly as an executive story editor, like, that's an example of someone having been set up for success. Like, I've had every show I've been on, I've had the opportunity to do that. So it's like, we know that the model works when we have done it in the traditional sense. It makes complete sense. You have 10 to 12 writers. If the writer is given an episode, why are they not on set seeing particularly the jokes that they've mostly written land, what doesn't work? We know that the model works. So when we try to change it for tech bros who have no idea how television is made in the slightest, it just doesn't make any sense.
There are these like mysterious grids that I hear about as a like person at a story editor level trying to get into the second writer's room here. And like I had a conversation once with my agent who called me about this show that was getting a season 2 that I was really excited about. And he was like, we're going to send in your samples for this. We think you're a really good fit. But according to the grid, what they're looking for this room is a producer, or someone at the producer level who's queer and from the Midwest. And so because I was going in for a mini room. And so I think something else that's beginning to happen, or that I perceive as happening from the mini room perspective, is that if they're only hiring 5 writers, I'm just throwing out that number, it's just a small number, then they're looking for all of these really hyper specific things where it sort of starts becoming less about your work and more about your level, in a way that is sort of like confusing. And the show had a lot of characters that looked like me, that wrote or spoke in the same style to the style that I had write in, but I simply wasn't Midwestern nor senior level enough. It's caused me to have these like weird conversations with my reps as like, where do I fit sort of thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a perspective from like upper level writers. I think that, when you're hired into this type of room, you're going in with an understanding that you don't have enough time to do what you need to do, right? From the beginning, you're set up to fail. You don't have enough time. So, I, as an upper level, am not really interested in a room that only has people at my level, with my experience. I want multiple perspectives from people of as many ages and backgrounds as possible. But when you know that you don't have enough time to do the work, you end up hiring people who you have a shorthand with, who can help you crank it out at this unrealistic pace. That's just the reality of it. And I think that hurts the final product in many ways. I think that, you're under the gun the whole time, number one, which is never good for anything creative. You're never going to get your best work that way. And you lose multiple valuable perspectives. So they've put writers in an impossible situation, both, newer writers and the upper level writers. It's just untenable.
I have a slightly like unconventional path too. I sold a pilot before I was even staffed on a show with 2 other writers. And this is 3 writers who are in a situation that is very rare. And already from the start, before it's even like, greenlit or not, they're already telling us like, oh yeah, there's 3 of you. Like, this makes sense to just set this up as a mini room. And it's like, how are you setting up 3 writers who have never been in a room on their first sold anything? And you're already starting with like, and you're going to get maybe 1 or 2 more people to help you do this. Makes 0 sense. None.
The insidious nature of the mini room is that the studios have separated production from the writing component and are therefore treating us less than. And so for upper level writers like Shelley, like myself, they are paying us less than we're worth, less than the at least of 10 years of experience that we bring to the table. And they're saying all of this work has to be on your shoulders for the next 10 weeks. And they're not looking at mid-level writers. Mid-level writers, which I consider story editors, which is your second year to supervising, which is like year 6 or 7 of your career. They're not looking at those people. They're looking at who are the people that have the experience on the resume so that we can underpay them. And whoops, we made a mistake because there are all these straight white guys in the room. So now we have to look for one staff writer who we're going to pay them less than. That counts as our diversity check mark. And it doesn't matter whether that person has been staffed in a mini room as a staff writer 4, 5, 6. I know someone who did staff writer 7 times through the mini room process.
Jesus Christ.
Oh my God.
That's
I know. I'm so thankful to be hearing all of these perspectives, and I'm also absolutely mortified. This is, yeah.
Well, and that kind of brings me to the next thing I wanted to touch on. Obviously, there's this existential dread. You're kind of having to deal with all of this and just knowing like that's how it is, that's just what's going on. I have to imagine that affects morale in the room. So like when you are inside a mini room, what is kind of the overwhelming feeling there? Is it pressure? Is it anger at being understaffed or not having the time that you need to? Like, what is kind of the feeling there? Because I imagine it's not great, and I imagine it's not going to be necessarily conducive to maybe your best work. But again, I've never been in a mini room, so this is your perspective.
Yeah, I think pressure is a good word. I think that frustration boils to the top a lot in these mini rooms because, television is supposed to be a collaborative medium. When you're in a writer's room, you're bringing forth your own personal experiences that you can then infuse on a show. That's what makes great art. And you don't have time for that in a mini room. You were there to do the 8 episodes very quickly, get everything down so that you can turn it into the studio to get your green light and then put all the work on the showrunner. One of the most frustrating experiences I had in a mini room was the goal kept changing from the studio. We started very early on saying, we love this show. We love the showrunner's vision. We see it as The Killing, for example. And then 5 weeks into it, we started delivering material and they said, well, you know what? No one's talking about The Killing on Twitter right now. They're talking about something else. So that's where we want your show to be. So we spent the last 5 weeks of our mini room trying to reconceive a show, build it from scratch, delivered that second version of the show, and they decided, well, you know what? That second show that we told you about, that's not trending on Twitter. Now this new thing is trending, and we just don't think that your show has a place in the current market space. And that's what's happening a lot in these mini rooms.
Yeah, very common. And a lot of times it feels like these notes that you're getting aren't even really from the executives or from the algorithm who is telling them what notes to give. It's nuts.
And how do you do it? Do you legitimately just have to take those notes and go with it? Are you even able to push back? Are you able to say, well, like we're trying to go in this direction because XYZ? Or is it just, you need to check these boxes, otherwise the show is not going to exist?
Yeah, if you don't take the notes, the show is going to go away.
I think it's easier for a studio or a streamer to axe a show like that because they haven't invested a lot in it, right? Because it's that small amount of time and small amount of writers that it doesn't allow for the creative process to truly breathe, right? And I think the hard part is that we are in a business. Of course, everybody wants to make money. And I don't begrudge the studios and streamers whatsoever for the fact that they want to make money. But they want to make money from a creative product. And so you need that time and investment and not to be just chasing Twitter trends, in order to make a good product. But the other thing I wanted to add is you asked about morale in a room. Well, I would say to anyone who's listening who's not a writer, imagine having to look for a new job every 2.5 to 5 months. That is difficult to do just overall. And then to be in this creative pressure cooker while you're like, well, I probably need to go on some interviews because this is about to end in 2 weeks. It's very hard to do your best work when you're also looking for your next job, because I can tell you that although writers, are fairly well compensated if you just look at a number for weekly pay. But then you have to think about the fact that you might not work for months on end, or you might be held on a show that you don't know if it's getting picked up or not. You don't know if you're coming back. So that number, while it might seem high to the average person, is lower because it has to spread out over all those times that you're not working. And also, cost of living in Los Angeles and New York are very, very high. But I guess the last thing I want to say is that, it is hard to be a creative professional at your highest level when you're scrounging for your next paycheck, period.
When you guys were in the mini rooms, were the shows originally, were they already greenlit and it was just set up as a mini room? Or did they say, we need a mini room just because we only want to do 4 episodes to see how this turns out, and then they keep extending the mini room from there?
For me, both mini rooms that I've been in were season 2s that they had not yet picked up.
Jesus. Yeah.
Right.
Woo! That is insane.
My first mini room was for a show that never got made, which was heartbreaking because it was like a lot. I'm queer. I'm Argentinian, son of immigrants, and that was the show. And it was based on very popular IP, and it just didn't go anywhere because the streamer couldn't make up its mind. But with the mini room that has a green light commitment, that's still in the camp. I don't know if that'll ever see the light of day.
There is one other aspect of this storytelling that I do want to touch on. Elaine, it was something that you mentioned earlier about when you're kind of in this mini room. It was, okay, you guys go do this and you do this and you're giving your episodes and go. How does that then all come together in the end, right? Because if you're not allowed to see, if you're not allowed to go to set and see what your kind of story is playing out as, if you're not allowed to see what other people are doing, how is this team then making a coherent season of television? Just because as a fan, if I'm watching something, I would really love for it all to kind of, flow. I would like that to be a thing. So how do you guys kind of get around that?
Well, I think, at least for me, I think that speaks to the tenacity of the showrunner and a possible number 2 or other high-level writer to take on that burden that normally would be spread through the room with everyone working together, and just having those people left. Because basically what happens once the mini room is done, all the other writers are sent away. Those 1, 2, 3 high-level who might be left over have to now go, oh my God, okay, here's what happened from these, this truncated amount of time to make this product. And now we have to make it cohesive. So I can just speak for the one mini room I've done, which was Gossip Girl, as I've mentioned. I watched it as a fan. I had no idea what was actually going to happen because I wasn't there to see the final product of the scripts and, how it all sorted out. Also, because of the pandemic, different things happened. They called the room back. I was lucky enough to have already gotten on to a new show, so I didn't come back. But regardless of that, I would not have been involved in anything past the first draft of the script that I turned in. So yeah, I had no idea what the season was actually going to end up being. And it's really an immense amount of responsibility and work that are thrust upon the shoulders of those few people who are left to put it all together.
If you could have maybe your top one thing change about mini rooms, what would it be? And Elaine, I'll start with you.
Have writers stay on through production in order to get that education, in order to also get the extended paycheck and in terms of stability, job stability, because you're on a show for a little bit longer while you're learning how to make that show.
I think writing starts with an idea and it ends in post-production. So the longer writers are a part of the process, the better the show.
I would echo those sentiments, but add that we need minimum writers in those rooms.
Danny stole it right out of my mouth because it doesn't make sense. when a show officially goes into production that you only have 4 to 5 people. It does not make any sense.
I just want to do it again and again and again. I think the thing that I would change is more access.
Fascinating. Guys, thank you so very much for being part of this conversation today, for educating those watching, for educating me. I legitimately do feel like I learned a lot. I appreciate all of your work. I appreciate all of your time being here today. So again, thank you to our panelists and to all our audience tuning in. You can continue staying up to date on all news regarding the strike over at TheWrap.com. And we also encourage you to check out our Wrap Pro membership hub, which is focused on serving professionals in the entertainment space. Be sure to save the date, October 4th, this year's Grill. It is Wrap Pro's annual conference focused on the convergence of entertainment, media, and technology. And for more details on that, you can check out the website over at TheWrap.com/thegrill. We will see you there. Dylan, Elaine, Shelley, Nasser, Danny, thank you guys so very much today. It has been a pleasure chatting with all of you.